Good morning, crime community. I'm here to read out the Poisoner in Chief. Continuing on with this chapter, Dirty Business. In the months after Japan surrendered to Allied forces on August 15, 1945, several captured Japanese officers told American interrogators that Japan had maintained a secret germ warfare program. They mentioned rumors that poisons had been tested on human subjects at a base called Unit 731 on the occupied Chinese region of Manchuria. Reports of these interrogations were forwarded to the biological warfare laboratories at Camp Dietrich. Scientists there, already excited by the prospect of data from Kurt Blom and other doctors who had served the Nazis, pressed for more. They discovered that the many army surgeon who ran Unit 731 was a general named Shiro Ishito, and asked the Counterintelligence Corps to find him, just as it had found Blom in Germany. Their plan was to keep him out of Soviet hands, then secure his loyalty by saving him from the gallows. Two obsessions, the extremes of Japanese nationalism and the extremes of medicine, shaped Shiro Ishiti. He came from a family of rich landowners and was an outstanding medical student at Kyoto International University. During the late 1920s, he became fascinated by the Geneva Protocol that bans biological warfare. Japan, like the United States, had refused to sign it. This meant, by Ishichi's reckoning, that it had every right to develop weapons that others could not, and that these weapons could be decisive in a future war. He saw this as his way to contribute his country's greater glory. In 1928, after finishing medical school, Ishichi set out on what became a 2-year tour of biology laboratories in more than a dozen countries, including the Soviet Union, Germany, France, and the United States. Upon his return to Japan, he joined the Army's Surgeon Corps. Soon he was helping to run a chemical laboratory where gas masks were tested. Although he became what one writer called a swashbuckling womanizer who could afford to frequent Tokyo's upmarket geisha houses, he remained professionally frustrated. He pressed the Army's minister, his patron, for a remote tract of land where he could carry out experiments on human subjects as a way to master techniques of germ warfare. In 1936, after the Japanese seized the North Coast China, he got his chance. Army commanders gave him a plot south of Harbin, the largest city in Manchuria. 8 villages were razed to make way for a 4-square-mile complex that came to house more than 3,000 scientists and other employees. Officially, this was the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Bureau. To those who worked there and the few others who knew of its existence, it was Unit 731. Our God-given mission as doctors is to challenge all forms of disease-making microorganisms, block all paths for their intrusion into the body, annihilate foreign matter residents in our bodies, and devise the best possible treatments. Ashiti told the men as they began to work, the research work on which we are now to embark on this complex opposite of those principles. Japanese soldiers began sweeping up bandits and other suspicious people in the locale countryside, threw them together with captured Chinese soldiers, anti-Japanese partisans, common criminals, and mental patients, and delivered them in batches to Ishichi. Between 36 and 42, Ishichi received at least 3,000 and perhaps as many as 12,000 of these quote-unquote logs, as he and his comrades called them. All were destined for excruciating death. Ishichi was driven to learn everything possible about how the body responds to different forms of extreme abuse. Logs, quote-unquote, were his subjects in almost inconceivable acts of vivisection. For the brave of heart and strong of stomach, here are some of the experiments in which the lives of prisoners were taken at Unit 731. They were exposed to poison gas so that their lungs could later be removed and studied. slowly roasted by electricity, determined voltages needed to produce death, hung upside down to study the progress of natural choking, locked into high-pressure chambers until their eyes popped out. This is amazing, man. Spun in centrifuges, infecting with anthrax, syphilis, plague, cholera, and other diseases, forcibly impregnated to provide infants for vivisection, bound to stakes to be incarcerated by soldiers, testing flamethrowers, and slowly frozen to observe the progress of hypothermia. Air was injected into victims' veins to provide embolisms. Animal blood was injected to see what effect it would have. Some were dissected alive or had limbs amputated so attendants could monitor their slow deaths by bleeding and gangrene. According to the U.S. Army report that was later declassified, groups of men and women and children were tied to stakes so that their legs and buttocks were barred and exposed and to shrapnel from anthrax bombs exploded yards away, then monitored to see how long they lived. This was never more than a week. Ashishi required a constant flow of human organs, meaning a steady need for quote-unquote logs. They included not just Chinese, but Koreans, Mongolians, and according to some reports, American prisoners of war. After each experiment, Ashishi's microbiologist would meticulously remove tissue samples and mount them on slides for study. Technicians used their research to prepare poison chocolate and chewing gum, as well as hairpins and fountain pens rigged with toxin-coated needles for use in close-quarters killing. In industrial-scale laboratories, they bred plague-infested fleas and manufactured tons of anthrax that were placed in bomb casings and used to kill thousands of Chinese civilians. American interrogators slowly grasped the nature and extent of the horrors and have been penetrated at Unit 731, but they could find no proof. In the last days of the war, Ashishi had ordered the execution of the last 150 logs at Unit 731, told the men that they must take the secret to the grave, and distributed cyanide capsules for them to use if they were captured. And his order, the complex destroyed with explosives. Japanese police officers acting in orders from the counterintelligence corps found Ashishi living almost openly in his hometown and arrested him. On January 17, 1946, he was brought to Tokyo. He was installed at his daughter's house on a home street. Over the next 4 weeks, he sat willingly for interviews at a Camp Dietrich scientist. They were informal, and even times were genial. He literally begged my father for top secret data on germ weapons, Ashishi's daughter later recalled. At the same time, he emphasized that the data must not fall into the hands of the Russians. Ashishi admitted no crimes. He insisted that Unit 731 was not spread plague virus in China and that its experiments with toxins were performed only on laboratory animals. American military scientists suspected that he was lying, because reports from captured veterans of Unit 731 suggested that he had overcome experiments in which thousands of human subjects died. Detailed reports of these experiments would greatly accelerate the American research into biological warfare. They offered Ashishi a stark choice. Tell us at least some of what you know, and you will be asset worth protecting. Stay silent, and you'll risk arrested by the Soviets and a possible death sentence. To this, they added the promise for which Ashishi had been waiting. The Americans were interested in technical and scientific information and not in war crimes. If you will give me documentary immunity for myself, superiors, and subordinates, I can get all the information for you, Ashishi replied. I would like to be hired by the U.S. government as a biological warfare expert. Both sides had no reason to pursue this deal. Ashishi knew he faced trial and likely execution if he refused to cooperate. Camp Dietrich scientists warned to learn that he knew and were driven by a sense of urgency that overwhelmed whatever moral qualms they might have felt. At the request, the Supreme Command of Allied Powers, led by General Douglas MacArthur, secretly promulgated a new principle. The value of the U.S. of Japanese biological weapons data is of such importance to national security as to far outweigh the true value from war crimes prosecution. Sounds like what was underneath Yellow Drive, secret lists that were national security. It's always national security. The next stop was to apply this principle to Ashishi and his comrades. General MacArthur had to move quickly because the International Military Tribunal the Far East was about to open its epochal trial of suspected Japanese war criminals. He signed a secret decree granting amnesty to Ashishi and all who worked with him at Unit 731. Statements from Ashishi, MacArthur reported, can possibly be attained by informing Japanese involved that information will be retained in intelligence channels and we will not be employed in war crimes evidence. Thus, did the man responsible for directing the dissection of thousands of living prisoners during wartime, along with those who worked with him, escape punishment. Unlike their German counterparts, however, they were not brought into the United States. Instead, the Japanese scientists were installed in laboratories and detention centers in East Asia. They were helped Americans conceive and carry out experiments on human subjects that could not be legally conducted in the United States. Chalking that up to simple racism does not adequately account for why Ashishi and his colleagues were not shipped to the United States. One academic study has concluded America was not prepared politically or structurally for an influx of new Japanese scientists. There were too many technical and cultural barriers to overcome. Once Ashishi was granted immunity from war crimes protection, he began turning over boxes of documents. They were full of uniquely valuable data about how various toxins affect the body, how these toxins can be spread, and what dosage levels kill most effectively. Scientists at Camp Dietrich were delighted. Ashishi then guided the Americans to temples and mountain retreats where he and his men had hidden 15,000 microscopes slides as the war was ending. Each slide contained a sliver of tissue from a human kidney, liver, spleen, or other organs that had suffered some sort of deadly shock. Victims had died after being exposed to extremes of temperature, after being infected with anthrax, botulism, bubonic plague, cholera, dysentery, smallpox, typhoid, tuberculosis, gangrene, and syphilis. Often the victims were still conscious when their organs were removed because Ashishi believed that the best data could be collected at the point of death. The slides were sent to Camp Dietrich, where scientists reported that they greatly supplemented and amplified America's research into biological warfare. Information had accrued with respect to human susceptibility. They wrote in one report, such information could not be obtained in our own laboratories because the scruples attached to human experimentation. It is hoped that individuals who voluntarily contributed this information will be spared embarrassment because of it. While the American protected veterans at Unit 731, the Soviets captured 12 of them and charged them with war crimes. All were convicted and given prison terms ranging from 2 to 25 years. The trails were not widely publicized. Over the following years, whenever reports about Unit 731 and Ashishi's work surfaced in the United States, government spokesmen dismissed them as communist propaganda. Yet the Soviet sentences were light by post-war standards. Evidence later emerged suggested that both the Soviet and Chinese governments used the expertise at Unit 731 veterans to advance their own biological weapons programs. During the war years, Kurt Blome and Shiro Ashishi had known of, admired, and encouraged each other's work. Designs of their medical torture centers were remarkably similar. When the Axis was finally defeated in 1945, it was reasonable to expect that they would share the same fate. So they did, but not the fate they might have feared. Scientists from Camp Dietrich had rescued Ashishi. Now they had to find a way to rescue Blome. We're going to end here. I swear I will finish this chapter tomorrow. There's just a few more pages left. Is that interesting about Camp Dietrich and what goes on there? It blows my mind. I don't know how you feel about it. Seems like the same thing's going on right in this very present day. God bless all the people, and I would love to earn your subscription and like. Have a good day.